Hey, audience listeners, my name is Hayward Crawford. Welcome back to the Career Pulse Podcast, your vital sign for career and business from everyday go-getters like you. Today, we have our Season 1 finale, Episode 8 of Season 1 of the Career Pulse Podcast, and I'm here to welcome Kurt A. David. Kurt David is the creator of the highly acclaimed book and TV show From Glory Days, which chronicles the lives of Hall of Fame, All-Star, and World Champion, former Detroit Pistons, Tigers, Red Wings, and Lions. His vast experience as a professional athlete, best-selling author, TV host, corporate keynote speaker, behavioral specialist, adjunct professor, university representative, and transition consultant for professional Olympic athletes has provided him with a unique ability to connect with diverse audiences. His second book, titled The Change, is co-authored by some of the nation's leading authorities on change and transition, and is part of a 5-book series that has become a global movement. Kurt now works with successful individuals, organizations, and corporations that at times face challenges with positive leadership, conflict resolution, team building, and face changing. Despite his extremely busy schedule, Kurt believes it's very important to give back and does so by volunteering his time and resources to numerous local, national, and international charities. Also, as a keynote and workshop speaker, Kurt's presentations are enlightening, entertaining, inspiring, and focused on positively changing lives. So everybody, please help me welcome our Episode 8 guest, Season 1 finale interview with the one and only Kurt David. Hello, listeners. It's Hayward Crawford, host of the Career Pulse Podcast. Welcome back. I'm sitting here with the one and only Kurt David, who is my official, I believe, 8th podcast guest. Kurt David is the creator of the highly acclaimed book and TV show From Glory Days, which chronicles the lives of Hall of Fame, All-Star, World Champion, former Detroit Pistons, Tigers, Red Wings, and Lions. His vast experiences as a professional athlete, best-selling author, TV host, corporate keynote speaker, behavioral specialist, adjunct professor, university representative, and transition consultant for professional and Olympic athletes has provided him with the unique ability to connect with diverse audiences. His second book, titled The Change, is co-authored by some of the nation's leading authorities on change and transition, and is part of a 5-book series that has become a global movement. Kurt now works with highly successful individuals, organizations, and corporations that at times face challenges with positive leadership, conflict resolution, team building, and facing change. Now, despite his extremely busy schedule, Kurt believes it is important to give back and does so by volunteering his time and resources to numerous local, national, and international charities. Also, as a keynote and workshop speaker, Kurt's presentations are enlightening, entertaining, inspiring, and he's really focused on positively changing a lot of different lives around the world. Welcome to the show. Kurt, how are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me on, Hayward.
Thanks for coming on, man. We're here. It's a beautiful Sunday afternoon that I was able to get you for this interview. And we're just going to pretty much dive right in.
Absolutely, yeah.
I've been following your work for a while, for a number of years. You're really become the authority in the career transition sports industry when it comes to athletes retiring, and you dive a lot into that. Because a lot of times it's Sports Center, ESPN. Mm-hmm. We don't really get a whole lot of that. We get the here and now. Here are the stats. Here's what this guy's doing. This is where this team going. But I think you were really, I feel like in the Detroit area, one of the first to really dive into this niche and really go over this, I think, very interesting topic. Typically, Kurt, when people first meet you, what do you typically tell people when they ask you what you do?
Well, first of all, Hayward, that was quite an introduction, and I don't think I have to do any more than that from what you gave there. I mean, that sounds like a pretty impressive person. I'd love to interview him as well. But
thank you.
Seriously, though, I mean, what I do all boils down to 2 objectives. One is to serve God and serve others. Mm-hmm. I mean, that truly is what my purpose here on this earth is. And anything that falls within those 2 objectives is what I do. And you mentioned about the transition consulting. That's something that it's just one of the avenues that I happen to serve people in. And we can get much more into that when talking about the book and TV show and working with former athletes. But that's what it boils down to, is serving God and serving others. That's what I do.
Okay. Now tell us, Kurt, about some of your early beginnings as an athlete.
Well, first of all, when I talk about being an athlete, that was 30 pounds ago. Okay, I don't talk about years. I talk about pounds.
Okay.
But back in my glory days, basketball started young. For me, it was basketball. I always seemed to be tall, and the audience can't see me, but let me get a visual here. Is that in 7th grade I was 5'11" at the beginning of my 7th grade year, and at the end of my 8th grade year I was 6'5". So that's really when my life began to change as an athlete, as I went from being 5'11" in 7th grade to being 6'5" at the end of the 8th grade year. Probably one of the most painful experiences I've had, because my joints, everything hurt. The more active I was, the more I hurt. And the way the doctors put it is that my bones were growing faster than the soft tissue around it, the muscle and ligaments. And as a result, the more active I was, it was more painful. But the good news is I was dunking at the end of my 8th grade year, which of course was like, oh, okay, this is kind of fun.
Yeah.
And at that point, so going into high school, looked at some opportunities and in basketball. I just kept growing. I was 6'8" by the time I was done in high school. Had some opportunities to play in college, accepted an offer at Saginaw Valley State University, played on a full ride scholarship there. I had some great teammates, had some great teams, had some great success during that time. And then when I was done playing in college, I actually had an opportunity to play overseas professionally. And went over to Germany. Now, let me proceed. Before I say that, is that one of my objectives, knowing that as an athlete, our career is over at some point, I purposely made sure I finished my degree before I went over there. So I took about an extra half year, almost a year, to finish my degree before getting over there. And went over there, had a great experience. It was like a paid vacation. But as every professional athlete finds, at some point you lose your job, right? And for me, I went in for knee surgery and found out it was time to probably start looking at another job.
And was this, when you went over, was this college or?
That was professionally.
Professionally.
Yeah, after I graduated from college, I had an opportunity to play over there through some connections. I actually I feel like I got better as a player after college.
Which team was that specifically?
In Germany. I lived just south of Frankfurt in Darmstadt area and played for a German team over there, and had another American teammate. At that time, you're allowed 2 foreigners on your team. So I was there. And
they put a cap on foreigners?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and so I had an opportunity to play over there, and my other teammate played at Clemson. He was from Clemson University. And so between the both of us, I think we averaged, mid-50s a game, between the both of us. And so we put up a lot of the points for the team. Had a lot of fun. But, that was my early beginnings as an athlete, and came back. I had a free agent tryout out in San Francisco. I was trying to make it back over here to see if I could play in the States. I don't think I was good enough for the NBA, but I was thinking, well, let me give it a free agent tryout shot anyway. And went in for knee surgery following that tryout, and point blank, the orthopedic said, well, you can keep playing and not by the walk by the time you're 40, or you can give it up. And at that time, I had other offers to go back to Europe or play even in South America in different countries. I had different offers. But for me, it was like, boy, what do I want to do? I was 26, 27 years old, limping like an old man. And it was like, wow, do I really want to put my body through this? And like the doctor said, not walk by the time I'm 40. And so for me, it was an easy choice. And let it go. Ended up taking a year off after that. And partway through the year, decided to go to grad school, start working on my master's in counseling.
Okay. Where was that at?
Central Michigan University.
Okay.
And so I literally took a year off, went back home up in Gaylord, where I grew up at in Gaylord, Michigan. And partway through the year, I thought, I need to do something productive. And that's when I decided to go to grad school, start my master's, and get a big chunk of that master's done. The neat thing was, that was a senior year of a guy at Central Michigan by the name of Dan Marley. And Dan was the guy that came out of Central Michigan, All-American, got drafted in the NBA, ended up having a great career in the NBA. And he and I were doing a lot of workouts together, even though he had obviously a very different path he was heading than I was. I was on the way out at that time, and he was on the way in, and had a great career. But it was kind of fun to be able to play and just hang out and work out with a guy like that year. So. And then after I was done with that year of grad school and playing with Dan and hanging out, took my first teaching job. My elementary education degree that I acquired from Saginaw Valley was put to use, and was a varsity basketball coach and teacher. And so that helped with that transition a little bit. That's what I did early on.
Awesome. it's just interesting how, like, you know, even back before you went over to Germany, I mean, you were already developing, like, okay, well, I need a plan B. Because a lot of people just go all in and just they don't even think or plan 5-10 years down the road. You know, so I think that was very smart of you. And I'm even thinking of, I know you say you listen to a few podcasts? Or, okay. Yes. Well, yeah, there's definitely a couple other people. Lewis Howes, he was a former professional athlete turned entrepreneur, and he was in the same boat. I mean, he ended up playing in the Olympics or something like that in football, got injured, and ended up developing another plan B he never would have thought of. You know, so it's really good to see. I see like career pivots. Yeah. You know, through that.
Absolutely. Well, I was very fortunate. There was 6 of us in my family growing up, 3 boys and 3 girls. My mom was a teacher and a coach at the school that we all attended. We attended a private school up in Gaylord St. Mary's. And my mother was a teacher there. My dad worked for the county at that time. He was a director for the county of social services, doing social services. And all 6 of us, my siblings, all 6 of us were on full ride athletic scholarship, and 2 of us played professionally. So imagine that household growing up. I mean, early on, it was very competitive, but we also had education as part of the foundation. My mom being a teacher, all of us understanding that we went on to college, had an opportunity to play in college. And I was able to learn from my older brother and sister actually that, okay, well, at some point this is going to be over. Right. And so they kind of were able to help plant that seed as a result.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So what would you say, Kurt, were some of the things that maybe first led you to focusing on the path of career transitions for athletes? So this is kind of after you transition out of, playing overseas, developing a post-college plan. What kind of led to that focus on, athletes transitioning?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Hayward. It actually didn't come until many, many years after that, after my own transition. Just to give you a little snippet about my transition, it took me about 5 years. When I was done playing pro basketball, it took me about 5 years to relax. I mean, I felt like I was in competition with everybody, because that's kind of the culture. You are in competition with everybody, not just the opponents that you play. You're in competition with your own teammates for playing time and who gets the ball and who's taking the shot. Right. And that said, it took me about 5 years to relax. Plus, you got to develop a new income. Because literally, you go from making money as a pro athlete to zero, right? It's nothing. I mean, you don't get you play 1 or 2 years overseas, or you play 1 or 2 years, or even just the average in the NBA or any pro sport. There's no pension coming, there's no check coming. Still, as soon as you're done, you don't get paid anymore.
Yeah, I didn't think about that.
And so it's like a cold hard severing. Like boom, it's done. Right. And that said, so the idea of career transition actually, or sports transition, came many years afterwards. And I think part of it was through my counseling. As a counselor, you learn to ask questions, kind of analyze things, think about things. And so through all those years of counseling and then thinking about sports, I literally had the idea, and this is where the concept of my book came from.
From Glory Days.
From Glory Days, yeah. The idea of the book literally came like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning. I woke up and it was like an epiphany.
That's where the best ideas pop up, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I thought, man, it would be neat to sit down with other former pro athletes and hear their story about life after pro sports. With the idea, my whole motive for writing the book was if one former athlete could read this and it helps them in their transition, that was my motive. And so that's kind of the foundation of where that sports transition came from. It started as an idea, and literally I started rolling out the interviews where I interviewed 20 former Detroit Pistons, Tigers, Red Wings, and Lions about their life after pro sports. Now, there was 2 caveats that were a foundation for the book, and were about the athletes that I interviewed. One is that they had to play at some point in their career with either the Pistons, Tigers, Red Wings, and Lions. I wanted to make it
that niche. Okay.
Yeah, that was the first thing. The second thing is they had to find success after sports. I didn't want to just interview guys that had their big careers, Hall of Fame careers, and then crashed afterwards, and then never really found it again, found their success again. I wanted to find athletes that found success again. Thus the subtitle, From Glory Days, Successful Transitions of Professional Detroit Athletes.
Like the Dave Bings or Mel Farrs.
We could go down the whole list of interviews that I've had. 36 TV interviews, 20 book interviews. I have actually another book coming out here with 16 more interviews. But that said, let me give the exit stats of pro sports to kind of set the stage, I guess. Okay. 100% of professional athletes ultimately lose their job. right? It's an undeniable fact, 100%.
Yeah.
At some point,
At
you
some
are
point.
done. Whether it's going to be at 22 or 42, you will be done at some point.
Right.
25% of NFL players are broke within the first year out. 60%, 60% of NBA players within 5 years are broke. 78% of NFL players within 2 years are broke. And there's an 80% divorce rate.
Why?
From job loss to disaster. That can be the reality of transitioning athletes.
Why is this?
Which part? I guess, divorce rates, the job loss. I mean, the money part of it, it's pretty simple. I don't care how much money you make. If you take a 90 or 95% pay cut suddenly, that's a major lifestyle change. And that's what happens. These athletes, they're making, today especially, they're making very good money, and all of a sudden it's gone. And you create a lifestyle, and all of a sudden the next year their lifestyle has to change very drastically. I mean, if I'm making $1 million as an example as an athlete, when I'm done playing pro sports, I'm lucky to make $100,000. That's a 90% pay cut. Oof. Right?
Yeah, but really puts things in perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And so it's really, that's the first part, and that's why there's such a huge bankruptcy rate and people going broke after pro sports, because think about it. I don't, my goal as an athlete is to play as long as I can, right? That's always a goal.
Right.
But the average is, I think, it's 3.2 years or whatever it is as a pro athlete. And so let's say, for instance, I do get lucky and play those 3.2 years. Unless I'm saving up 90% of my income, I'm going to have to work afterwards anyway, right? And so let's say, let's break down the numbers. Let's say, for instance, as an example, I signed $1 million contract. Okay. That $1 million contract now becomes maybe about $600,000 after taxes. I'm going to write my agent a fee, right? So there's another $100,000 right there. So now I'm down to $500,000. All of a sudden now, oh boy, I got to have this watch. I have to have this new house. That first year income is gone, literally gone. And then if I am lucky enough to get signed again for the next year, sign a multi-year, you can kind of see the math, how it works, right? But that said, again, most athletes aren't prepared for that transition because it either comes in the form of an injury, either comes in the form of, hey, you know what, you're not good enough anymore, we're taking the next guy in line, or maybe it's towards the end of their career. Advice is only as good as it is heeded, and so if an athlete is smart with their money and does take the advice from financial people, because face it, as athletes, we're not financial wizards, not whatsoever. Most pro athletes don't have that financial literacy coming into the game. They just know.
No one ever sat them down from day one after they got signed.
Absolutely not.
This is what is going to happen.
Yeah.
So what you need to prepare for. It's kind of like they get the money, they get the career, and
I'm going to buy that Bentley. I'm going to buy that watch. I'm going to buy that white tiger. Whatever. I mean, I think about Michael Tyson.
Tiger.
Yeah, Michael Tyson, and I don't know him personally. I don't know, what kind of person he is. Obviously, he's been in the forefront of news for years. But Michael Tyson burned through $300 million.
Oh.
$300 million. I mean, that's more than some countries' gross domestic product.
How many schools he could have built overseas?
So think about that. I mean, granted, some of the people robbed him blind. Some of the people he had associated with, they robbed him blind. But, some of the choices he made, too. Did he really need those white tigers? And, you know what I'm saying? And so it's just sad to see how something like that happens, and it's a tough lesson. And I'm not saying that because it's a judgment, because all of us at some point, as an athlete, it's like, wow, what do I do now? I don't have any income, and how do I spend it? But so that's the reason for the high bankruptcy and high broke rates, because of the fact that they go from here, all of a sudden take a 90-95% pay cut suddenly, and it's like, wow, I got this big house mortgage, or I got this I got to pay on. Now, the divorce rates, because they're so high, in my opinion, everybody focuses on, they're out on the road and they're cheating on their wives. I don't, some athletes might do that. I would like to think there's some that don't as well. But think about this. Everybody who's been in a relationship would really understand this, is that if all of a sudden I'm making this amount of money, this large amount of money, and I'm on the road 6 months out of the year, I might see my spouse in between weekends, or, when I'm home in between games, and then all of a sudden we take a 90% pay cut and I'm around every day. Think about the stress on that relationship. For one, I'm taking, we have less money. For two, we're around each other every day now.
So now we're just agitated.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And so that's why there's such a high divorce rate.
Man. So that's really some good perspective on there. Now, kind of transitioning to kind of how you run your business, run your brand. How important do you feel is the management of time and sticking to a schedule? And how do you fit all these things in and still find time for family? And
Hayward, that you just nailed it. Time to me is the most important commodity I have. Time. It really is. I mean, money's important, titles and prestige are important, but time is the most important commodity that I own. That said, managing that commodity is huge, and it's become more and more important to me over the years because my time has become more valuable. The time we're sitting here today, this is valuable time for you and I both, but this is the value that we bring, and what can we do with that time. One of the things that I have to do is I literally have 2 calendars now. And that's one of the things. I'm always checking both calendars. I'm also checking, our family calendar, because to me, I mentioned about serving God and serving others.
Yes.
The most important others that I can serve first is my family. And if I'm cheating my family by doing something that I really didn't need to be doing, I've had to say no many more times than I say yes anymore. And it's hard because sometimes those yes or those no's are great things that I'd want to be involved with and do, but it's like, you know what, no. This is the only opportunity I have to be home with our daughters tonight, and I have to say no. And so, so management of time is huge. The busier I get, the more important that time management is. You mentioned about sticking to a schedule. Certainly, we can alleviate or not alleviate. We can establish a schedule, but sticking to a schedule sometimes isn't always possible. Flexibility, in life happens, especially with family, or you got a sick kid or something going on. It's like, okay, boy, I had this plan, but guess what? We're not going to do this now.
Yeah, pivot.
yeah. And so, I want to say that, being totally rigid to a schedule. But, you have to certainly have a schedule and have that time management, especially the busier you are and the more important you want to change lives.
Okay. Well, yeah, definitely. The management of time, and I feel like a lot of people, if they value time the same way they did money, there'll be a lot more productive things going on.
No, absolutely.
I value it just as much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, can I say something more about that?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Probably one of the most important things I had to do in order to recognize management of my time, Hayward, is I had to prioritize what are my priorities. What are my daily priorities? What are my priorities in life? And it's I don't know if you can visualize this, but it's kind of like that jar. I've seen this illustration before. There's a jar. You got a big jar, and it's got big rocks in it. Then it's got smaller rocks in it.
The big rocks,
some sand,
and
then some water in it.
Yeah, explain this to the listeners.
And so what that is that illustration kind of illustrates our lives and priorities. In other words, if I take that jar and empty it, all the big rocks, smaller rocks, sand, and water out, and I try to put the stuff back in different order, and I don't put those big rocks in first. Let's say, for instance, I put the water in, then I put the sand in, then I put the smaller rocks. By the time I get to the big rocks, they're not going to fit in that jar. And that's symbolic of priorities. In other words, our daily life, we have our whirlwind of life going on every day, right? Things happen. So that might be the sand, that might be the water, but we have to get those big rocks in that jar first, that daily jar of what are my priorities.
The non-negotiables, get done no matter what, whether you feel like doing it or not.
Yeah, they have to get in there somehow, sometime, some way. And so what that entails, though, is you have to think about, well, what are those priorities? What are my big rocks? And every year I reevaluate my life and my family life and look at, okay, what are my priorities this year? In fact, every year I set new priorities, and some might be an adjustment. Some might be an adjustment of what I do from the year before. Some might be, okay, boy, it's totally different depending on what the priority is. But I got to tell you, always number one for me is my relationship with God, and then number two is my relationship with my family. And then beyond that is, okay, boy, how do I make a living? How do I, make an income for my family, and what do I do? And so, but knowing what those priorities are, help me understand how to manage my time. Because let's say, for instance, something comes up and it's not really part of my big priorities, and I have to get this big priority in today, I'm gonna have to say no to that, because it's like, I can't. No, sorry, I can't do that, because here's my big priority. This big rock sitting on the jar. I got to get back in there yet today somehow. So I can't put that in there yet until I get that big rock back in there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, so that helps with time management and understanding, how to do that. It doesn't mean that the big rocks always go in first. Sometimes the whirlwind of life comes and something else has to go in. But you have to find and make a time to say, how do I get that big rock and my big priority in there first, or at some point?
Awesome. Now, could you share with us what a day in the life of Kurt David looks like from the time you wake up until you go to bed?
Which day? Because
I don't know.
It's different.
It could give me
day.
a good day, a bad day, or I don't know.
Well,
in between.
Since about 2007, I've been on what I call a writer's schedule. A writer, like an author's schedule, I call it.
Okay.
Because it happened, actually it was before that, when I started writing the book about 2005, 2006. And what I mean is that my sleep schedule changed, my day schedule changed. I learned to actually optimize my time. So you mentioned about what time do I wake up and what time do I go to bed. When I started writing the book, I was using my time any way possible to write that book, between family events. Sometimes I'd wake up at 2 o'clock in the morning and it was like I had clarity. I'd work for an hour and do some writing. Then I'd go back to bed for another 3 hours. I always made sure that if I did that schedule that I got my REM cycles. I was always very conscious of getting that REM cycle in, that 90-minute REM cycle at least, or a couple of those in. But so when do I wake up? I mean, sometimes I wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll get up, I'll do work for a while, then I'll go back to bed. So that's kind of, and then, then I'll get up. Right now, my daily routine is that I drive our daughter to high school. So I'm up at about 6:30, drive her to high school, come back, get ready, head into the office, do some work, and sometimes I have longer days. I mean, the last couple of weeks I put in some 12, 14-hour days because we're starting to ramp up again for the next season of the TV show. But yeah, so it really varies. I mean, I'd say some days are fairly light where I might put 4, 5, 6 hours worth of work. Other days I'm putting in 12, 14 hours worth of work, and some of that might be at 3 o'clock in the morning. Some of them might be 9 o'clock at night. That's kind of how my life is right now. But understanding that I always have to say, okay, how do I make sure that I don't cheat my family by doing that? Because that's the hardest part for me. We're going to talk about challenges. That's probably one of the biggest challenges for me.
Yeah, because sometimes you kind of get caught in like, well, it's pushing 9, 10 o'clock. Well, if I send a couple more emails, I can get this one little thing done. And then for me, especially, it's getting better at just knowing, cut off. I've gotten everything I need to get done. Well, I've gotten everything I could do today. Time for me to transition into this.
Yeah.
So you ever find yourself cutting that hard cut?
You understand. You're doing it yourself right now.
Yeah, I'm still struggling a bit, but I'm getting better.
Well, the biggest thing is, what helped me the most was understanding what my priorities were. And what number they were. What's number 1? What's number 2? What's number 7? Right? And that way I have to look at, okay, boy, where does that fall? Oh, that's a number 7, and I haven't done number 2 yet. Okay, I need to get that done. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes a whole lot of sense. Yeah. So share with us maybe the process of writing. You share with us a little bit about writing. Sometimes it comes to you 3, 4 in the morning. Maybe you have a block in your schedule every day to specifically work on that. Tell us about the process of writing from Glory Days, from its early development to its final publishing.
I mentioned about the revelation. It was like a 3, 4 o'clock in the morning where I just had I even had the visual of the book cover, what it was going to look like, with uniforms hanging up in the locker room.
Right.
And so that came, and then my father got ill and had Alzheimer's in the latter part of his life, and so I didn't touch the book for about 2 years through that process. After his passing, then it was time for me to pick that back up again and start the writing process. So I had the idea. It was about 2 years later that I actually then started doing the interviews and writing. Overall, 2 things I really want to bring up, and I say this to students when I speak to students about writing too.
Okay.
First of all, it took me 3 years to write this book. Right, 3 years. Okay. And it was like, oh my goodness, this is a test of durability and endurance, and it really, many times I could have easily just said, you know what, this isn't worth it, right?
Yeah.
But I stuck with it. That's the first thing. The second thing is, one of the best things I did during that writing process was I was reading. I found that one of the best ways to help a writer is to read books. As an example, I had a chapter in a book that I was writing about this guy. He was a Super Bowl champion. He had these big old sausage fingers. He had a size 15 Super Bowl ring that would have fit on my big toe. And I swear when I met this guy, he had to turn sideways to walk through the door to fit in because his shoulders are that big. All right,
wow.
That was just the impression.
You didn't need shoulder pads.
Yeah, no, I was the impression I had this guy. So as I was thinking about how to write this chapter about this guy, I'm like, man, there's so many great things about him. I was reading a book at that time. In fact, it's one of my books I was going to recommend later on. It's called Wisdom of Our Fathers by Tim Russert. And in this book, he had taken letters from people all over the country that had written letters about their father, and he compiled them into a book. Well, one of the letters in the book that I was reading that he had was about their father, and it was talking about blue collar, white collar. You know, we have the classification that's symbolic of our shirts, so to speak. You know, are you a blue collar worker? Are you a white collar worker? But in that one chapter, somebody was describing about their father's hands, about their hands being blue collar hands versus white collar hands. So kind of parallel with, you know, they wear white collar, well, they have white collar hands, and blue collar hands. And it struck me like a lightning bolt. This guy with his size 15 Super Bowl ring, big shoulders, you know, all this, I thought, that's it. He's got the blue collar hands. And so it helped me write that chapter opening and kind of pair into that. So reading really helped me with the writing process, and I recommend anybody, especially if you get hung up into writing, just start reading, because when you read, you get other ideas and
it just takes one nugget to just kind of set that light bulb off.
And so the writing process, you know, was difficult. It took me 3 years.
From what time? 05 to 08?
The book came out in 2007, so it would have been about 2004, 2005 I started writing it. Yeah, and then it was released in 2007. So yeah, it would have been about 2004 that I started the interviews and writing. And then one of the things too about the writing process is that if I can write a book, anybody can write a book. I'm being very serious. Okay, I have an English minor, but growing up, I got to tell you, as a kid, as a fourth, fifth grade, kid, fourth or fifth grade year old, or fourth or fifth grade age kid, I hated reading and writing. I absolutely hated it. I'll tell you to the point that in seventh grade, I smudged a paper in Mr. Victor's class. I'll never forget this. We were supposed to do a book report. I'd never read the book. I just kind of faked it all and just put these different characters in there, and he called me on it. And it was like so sobering, like, oh my goodness, he caught me. And my point for bringing that up is not to glamorize that, is that I really didn't like reading or writing at that time. But thank goodness, thank God, I had teachers, and I at least paid enough attention to learn about the writing process, to learn about reading, and all the way through college even, with all the composition classes and writing classes. Thank goodness I did at least learn something, that I had a foundation. So when it did come to the fact of writing a book, I mean, if you would have told me at 15, at 20, even at 25 years old that I'd be writing a book, I would have laughed at you like, yeah, forget it, no way, I hate writing, right? And so that's why it's so important for our youth to hear that message, because of the fact that, yeah, you know what, you never know. You never know, right? And so having a foundational skill like that is imperative, because, you know, maybe 20 years later, you might decide that, oh, okay, I'm going to use this skill now, whether it be writing or reading or whatever it is. So that said, that was quite a process. And the publishing aspect of it, you asked about the publishing aspect. I was turned down by about 4 or 5 different publishers, kept pitching the idea, hey, this is my book idea, this is what I want to do. Got turned down and finally got picked up by a publisher out of Baltimore, Maryland that picked it up, and that was our first publishing. That was the first edition. It was through them.
Now, with this, I'm kind of jumping ahead here, but the new book, The Change, I mean, with everything with social media and internet evolving the way it is, a lot of people go the self-publishing route. So was The Change, was this book self-published, or did you go the publishing route as well? What's your aspect?
That was a traditional publisher as well. That was a kind of unique thing. That happened about, I don't know, 3-4 years ago now, I guess it was. I got a phone call out of the blue by a gentleman out of California, and his name was Jim Britt. And he called me up and he reached out and he said, hey, I heard you kind of deal with change and transitions. I said, yeah, that's kind of what I do. And he says, well, you know, would you be interested in co-authoring a book? And I said, well, tell me more. And he started talking about his life. He says, well, I was a mentor for Anthony Robbins before he made it big.
Wow.
And I'm like, okay, you just got my attention.
He mentored Anthony Robbins.
He mentored Anthony Robbins before Anthony made it big. I mean, this guy,
you got my attention.
Right, exactly. And he said, well, you'd be interested in co-authoring a book? I said, yeah, absolutely. And so the nice thing is, I only had to write one chapter, which at that time I wanted to write another book about transition and change, and I actually already had like a chapter written about change and transition. And so really it was meant to be. And he says, well, all you have to do is write one chapter. It was like so many words, 3,000 words. I said, I already have that.
Yeah,
he says, great.
And he'll do the heavy lifting.
Right, exactly. Nice. And so they have a series called The Change, and I think they have 4 or 5, and I'm one of the co-authors of the book. There's many nationally known authors that are in there. And so my chapter is literally just one chapter about my change and about transition. And so that came out, I don't know, 2-3 years ago, I guess now. I haven't done much with it because I'm focused more on a TV show.
Right.
And then coming out with another From Glory Days. I got another From Glory Days coming out.
So is it going to be like a second edition?
It's going to be the same idea, only with new interviews.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right. So tell us a bit about your, obviously you're very committed, involved in different, numerous local, national, international charities. Could you kind of touch on some missions or organizations that speak to you?
Yeah, absolutely. To me, and this is part of the way I was brought up, was that giving back is an important part of who we are. In other words, I've been very fortunate to have lots of great experiences, meet a lot of great people, but giving back is part of my, the foundation of who I am. And so, it's nice to have things that I receive, but I also understand how important it is to give back, in other words. And I do so through resources, through, not just monetary donations, but through my time, and I volunteer. I think I'm on 4 different boards right now, or advisory committees. I'm with a local credit union, LOC Federal Credit Union. I'm on their board. I'm an ambassador for the Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries, who services about 2,000 homeless people in Detroit and Pontiac every day. I'm also involved with an organization called International Sports Association out of Chicago. I'm an advisory board member for them. And I'm an advisory member for something called Beyond Sport Integrated. And what that is, that's an organization out of Africa, in Mons, Africa, that helps educate kids about HIV through sports. And so sports is kind of the hook to get kids in.
Get people in.
Yep, and then they educate kids, because it is, there's a lot of challenges over there with the HIV and how it's approached. And so those are the 4 that I'm on the forefront. I'm involved with many other charities and given different capacities. And so, it's a part of who I am, is giving back. And so I think that's so important.
Yep. And definitely. There's a lot of different causes, and I can see how a lot of it does tie into your overall mission. Now, can you share with us, Kurt? It's maybe more of a general kind of question, but share with us some of your mentors. Whether alive or past, celebrity or personal.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Top 5.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd have to say my mother and father. They were the first mentors that I ever had, obviously. And watching their lives, my dad was the director of social services for the county, so his role was to help people that needed help. That was his role. And my mother was a teacher, a lifelong teacher, and so she was constantly giving back as a coach and a teacher. And so I saw how they operated and how they gave back, and so they were kind of my original role models and mentors, so to speak. After that, obviously, there was coaches, and so many coaches in my life had an impact on my life. Some positive, maybe some not so positive. But that said, I could go through a whole list of coaches. There was also some spiritual advisors that I think were great mentors for me that were growing up, and as well as my adult years. And so really, people moving in and out of your life, and they touch your life. Sometimes it's just for a moment, but it has an impact, and sometimes it's more long-standing.
Right.
And so, it started with my parents, but then, again, I'd have to give you a long list of celebrities and other personal people that have touched my life, and I don't want to cheat anybody by leaving somebody out, so I really rather not say the list, but I can assure you that it's quite a list of people that have impacted my life.
They're listening, they know who they are.
In a positive way, absolutely. I hope so.
Okay. Now, what do you do, Kurt? This, another sort of general question, but I think important. What do you do to grow on a daily basis?
No, that's a great question, Henry. I think it's so important. And in my opinion, if you're not growing, you're dying. That's the first foundation. If you're not doing something to grow, you're personally dying. And so I look at one of the ways that I do that is reading. I like to read different topics. I typically tend to be nonfiction because I just have never gotten to that fiction world, so to speak.
Right.
But so a lot of nonfiction I read, whether it be topical about a certain topic or about a certain thing. I'm a history buff, so I like things about history as well. That's one of the things. I read, the Bible on a daily basis, and so I try to get insight from that. That gives me a little foundation and insight. I think another way that I grow is kind of the iron sharpening iron. I mean, there's times that I get challenged, whether it be from family or from personal or professional relationships, and I grow through that. I mean, it's important to understand that I'm not going to agree, and everybody's not going to always agree with me, and sometimes through that you have growth process that occurs as a result. And so it's through the reading, through the relationships, those all, with the right attitude can help us grow.
Okay. And do you ever find, to piggyback off that, do you ever find yourself maybe struggling, comparing yourself to others? They kind of call that compare and despair, where, there's maybe others at a level you're not at yet, or, just comparing. I think we all do that. Facebook, social media. There's always someone maybe at a different level or doing things you want to get to. Do you ever find yourself?
It's probably, I used to. I absolutely used to. I used to compare myself, but now I use other people's success as a learning tool for me. I'm hungry to learn from other people. If I see somebody doing something successful that I'd like to do, I'm not jealous of them. I'm very happy for them, for one. And two, I'm like, how do I do that? What can I learn from them, right? So I get excited for that reason.
Kind of a big part of how I started this podcast was, a lot of what you just said.
You learn from others.
Learn from others. What is he doing? Okay, figure out from him.
Yeah, how do I do that? And what can I do? And so I think, comparing ourselves is not healthy in the sense of, they got this, or they have that much money, or they're doing this. I don't think that's healthy whatsoever. I think it's good to look at and say, how do I get there? Somebody has something that is of value to me. How do I reach that level? And what can I do to learn from that? That's probably the most important thing that I try to do is trying to not compare, but to learn, if that makes sense.
Now, what would you say may have been some of your biggest setbacks or failures you may have had in your career looking back? And how would you say faith played a role in maybe bringing you back from those dark times or setbacks?
Well, well, how much time do we have?
We're midway through the question.
I think when you look at failures, I mean, I got a laundry list of failures on a daily basis to big ones, and I've screwed up in a lot of different ways. And one of the best things, I guess, is that I've learned that failure is not fatal. The biggest thing I've learned from my failures is that it's actually a way to look at, okay, what can I do different? Most recently, in the last 3-4 years, I learned a process called PDCA. PDCA. It's plan, do, check, and adjust. Plan, do, check, and adjust. Yeah, and what that process is that going to be applied to any part of our life, our spiritual life, our family life, my life as a husband, my work life, whatever. That can be applied. I'm planning something, I'm going to do it, I'm going to check the results, and then I'm going to adjust. And by doing that, let's say, for instance, as a spouse, it's like, okay, I want to plan to do this. And I do it, I check the results, oh boy, it didn't work out too good, right? I better adjust and try it again, right? By doing that, it takes failure off the table. In other words, failure is no longer final or fatal. It is just a learning tool. And by continuing that process, that plan, do, check, and adjust, I can readjust and learn from my failures as a result. So I could go through a long, long list of failures I've had in my life, but more importantly, I can tell you that from those failures, I've actually learned tremendously. I used to think that the opposite of success was failure, but then I realized that failure is such an integral part of growth because it is one of the things that we learn from. As a very real example, I think everybody's heard of a guy by the name of Thomas Edison, right?
Of course.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be sitting here in the light if it wasn't for this guy, probably.
Right.
And my point is, how many times did he fail in just inventing a light bulb, right? 1,000 times or whatever it was, right? Yeah. He failed. Or was he simply just doing that PDCA process? Plan, do, check the results, then he adjusted, right? And we could apply that to any part of our life. And so, the second part of your question was, how does faith play a role in that? Well, I think that's exactly what it does. It's having faith that things will get better, things will improve. Having that faith, whether it be a spiritual faith or just a faith that, boy, I can do this, that's huge. It's absolutely huge, because that's where you develop that hope. Because without hope, those setbacks or those failures, I don't even want to imagine what that would do, because I guess I wouldn't be able to move forward from those dark times, so to speak.
Yeah, so that's what you have. All we have is faith. And
Lead by sight. Lead by faith, not by sight.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good quote I always like to think about. Now, top 1 or 3 favorite books.
Oh,
we have these
only
covered
1 or 3
that you didn't write.
Yeah,
but,
I didn't write. Okay.
you can give me more. I'm just kind of curious. I could rattle off some titles.
Some of the favorites that I've had in the recent past. There's one called Beyond Belief.
Mm-hmm.
It's about the life of Josh Hamilton, who plays for the Texas Rangers, and went through his addictions and success and amazing story. This guy, he came out as a top-ranked athlete and goes through his whole life story about his addictions and how he overcame them. Still, struggling.
Mm-hmm.
But it's called Beyond Belief. Great
Okay.
book. There's another one I alluded to earlier that helped me in my writing process. It was called Wisdom of Our Fathers.
Mm-hmm.
Wisdom of Our Fathers by the late Tim Russert, who was a NBC host on
Meet the
shows.
Press.
Correct, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And he wrote a book, and it really had an impact on my life. It was about our fathers. It also helped me write my book, and it was also about the time that my father was ill and going through what he had to go through before he passed. And so it had an impact on that stage of my life as well.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned about my books, of course, From Glory Days is one of my favorite
Mm-hmm.
books. But, another one is the number 1 best-selling book in the world in history,
Mm-hmm.
right? The Bible,
Mm-hmm,
right?
of course.
The number 1 best-selling book in the world in history
Mm-hmm.
is the Bible, and I'd have to say that's definitely one of my favorite reads as
Basic instructions before leaving Earth.
Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly.
Yeah. iPhone or Android?
Android.
Why?
Yeah. My family, the rest of my family is all iPhone simply because I think they like all the apps and it's just kind of the craze.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm more business-minded, and so Android has been more friendly for me for the business aspect of it,
Mm-hmm.
that's all.
Okay.
I'm not anti-iPhone. I found Android to be more of a suited for what I do on a day-to-day
Any
basis.
apps or tools from Android that you recommend for business?
Oh,
that
boy.
Really...
Obviously Calendar, Google Calendar be one of them,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm trying to think of some that I use on a daily basis, the email. I use a social media management program, and what that is, for people that may not understand, social media management program, it takes all of our social media, and rather than uploading updates or something, each one individually, you can
Mm-hmm.
upload it to the social media management program, and it uploads it to all of them at once.
Mm-hmm.
Then. And so we use that a lot. I use Hootsuite as one of them.
I was on Hootsuite for a while, and I kind of fell off a bit, only because you do have to set it all up in a queue.
Right.
I guess I'm a little less on social media, but yeah, that's definitely a great tool.
Yeah, because we rather than uploading to 5 or 6 different social media apps to everything that we have going on, we just upload it once and then it goes out.
Right.
We don't do that all the time. Sometimes we keep it more personal to just Twitter or Facebook or. This Snapchat is a new thing for me now too. So.
Oh, you're on Snapchat?
Yeah, I'm on Snapchat.
Yeah, I'm on it, but I need to get back on it.
Yeah,
I guess.
I only did it because we have a high school age daughter, so I just wanted to get in, just kind of learn a little bit to say, okay, what is going on here?
Yeah, I need to innovate as well. Is there any top 1 or 2 inspirational films?
I don't know if they call these inspirational, but it's certainly my favorite. My number 1 film of all time that I love.
Rudy.
Nope,
okay.
That's a great one. Rudy's a great one. It's a great inspirational film. It's going to sound funny, but it's The Sound of Music. The Sound of Music.
Oh, okay.
And let me tell you why. One is I've been there where they filmed that, which is unbelievably breathtaking. I mean, it's hard to stand there and not believe there's a God because it's just so beautiful.
Where they filmed it? Where they filmed it?
In Austria.
Wow.
Yeah, in Austria. And just the inspiration of the story and what they had to go through to get to where they needed to go to have the freedom. And then the music throughout. I'm a big music guy. I love music. And so it's kind of corny. A lot of my buddies are like, what? Sound of Music? But, those songs are classic. They'll always be classic, and I just love the story.
Timeless. Yeah. Now, is there anything that still makes you, as far as transitioning back to mindset, how we, run our life and business, is there still anything that makes you uncomfortable, and is that a good thing?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think one of the things that makes me uncomfortable now is who am I and what do I do? In other words, as you know, I was a counselor and worked in schools for quite a few years, and I changed from that, and it still makes me uncomfortable a little bit to say, well, what is it you do? I mean, that was your opening question, is what is it that you identify as? And I've still, I don't have a pat answer, I guess, as far as that's why I always say I serve God and serve others. But it kind of makes me uncomfortable to say, well, what do I do? And I guess it challenges me to really think about it.
More like
what do I do? What is it that I do? I do all these things, but what is it?
What's my purpose?
I know my purpose, but I guess it makes me think about what is my title, so to speak.
Right, the title.
And so that's the part that makes me uncomfortable: is do I have a title? Do I not have a title? Do I want a title? I really don't want a title. So those things are kind of probably make me a little uncomfortable.
And maybe in some aspects, maybe some people believe that you may not have to be defined by one title.
I agree. I totally agree.
It can be whatever you want it to be.
Yeah, I agree. Why box myself in, for one?
Right. Now, what is one thing you're always looking to improve upon or feel you can do better?
Be a better husband.
Okay.
Yeah, I just always feel I can do better than that. Better and keep improving with that and learning and then the thing to follow it up is being a better parent. I always believe that I want to do the best I can to be a parent, because those are the two most important jobs I have in the world. Among all these other titles and all these other things that I do, those are the two that should be number one. And so those are the things that I'm always looking to improve.
All righty. So what's next for you, Kurt? Looking 3 years out, 5 years out. What are some long-term goals? Your overall mission of what you want to continue doing?
Number one is getting the show national. We really want to get the show national. Right now it's just in Metro Detroit and Michigan, and we really want to roll this thing out to a national level, which means we have to get to a national level of production, and we also have to get to a national level of guests. To be honest, and this is the part that surprises people often, getting guests on the show is the easiest part. Lining up guests and world-class athletes. If I don't have their cell phone, I know somebody that does have their cell phone. And so that's the easiest part.
Right.
It's lining up the funding for these shows and lining up sponsors and advertisers. That's the part that really is difficult, because I'm not a born salesman, so to speak. I was raised and was a teacher and a counselor and a player, athlete, and just had an idea. I just had an idea. And so that's probably the most difficult part, but I see us going national with the show in that sense. So doing that. My overall mission for the show isn't just to have former athletes on and tell about their story, but it's to help others. In fact, our mission for the show is to have people look at their own way of giving back in the community. So in other words, how are these athletes community minded?
Right.
How do they handle their finances? And then how do they redevelop that new passion and purpose? And then parallel with that, with the fans that are watching, like how do I parallel that with the people that are going through transition in their own lives, right? I mean, everybody's going through transitions.
In one way or another, that's the thing. Like, a lot of this is very universal. A lot of universal principles in these books, and it doesn't apply just for athletes. I don't.
Correct.
Yeah. So, looking back at your life and experiences, would you change a thing or do something different if you had the chance?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's things, and I can just be, I guess, very open about it. There's things in relationships that I wish I would have done different in the past. I look through all the different friends and ways I've handled things with friends and different circumstances that, I look back and say, oh man, I wish I could have had a redo on that one, or just done it a little bit differently. It just, I learned and look back at it now, it's like, oh boy, you can't change it. No question about that, but absolutely. And so I guess looking back, there would be some things that I would have changed in those areas.
Okay. Now, as far as I kind of jumped the gun a bit, now as far as you said you're trying to take the show more national, book more national guests, so are you looking beyond just Detroit athletes that come from those Detroit teams to look at maybe other different pro teams in different cities?
We're looking at national level names. And so, like for instance, last season we had Ray Lewis on the show from the Baltimore Ravens, two-time Super Bowl champion, NFL MVP. So we've had him on the show. We have other opportunity for other national name guests. But again, it just means getting more funding so we can get to these athletes and have better production. And so it just takes time to kind of keep cranking up slow as we scale. And so, yeah, absolutely. So it's not just going to be Detroit athletes. Certainly there's going to be some national names in Detroit. I think of a Barry Sanders, right? He's known very well nationally. And there could be a whole other list of others, Steve Eiserman and others as well. And so, absolutely. So there'll be not just, Detroit athletes, but national name athletes.
Maybe Olympic athletes, or
yeah, we consider them. I mean, there's 3 criteria that need to occur for, I guess 4 technically. One is they need to have a Hall of Fame status, or All-Star, or World Championship.
Okay.
Right? They have to have one of those statuses ideally. And the second thing is that we want them to have success again. In other words, after they were done with pro sports, how did they find success, and what are they doing again? It's to have success. Okay. And those are the stories that we want to promote.
Okay. Very interesting. All right, I just wanted to get the full nitty-gritty on that. Now, where can Kurt, our listeners, find out more about you, along with other info, your events? You can give us a website.
Yeah, absolutely.
Things.
Yeah, there's 2 websites we have. KurtDavid.com, which is KurtDavid, KurtDavid.com, and the other one is FromGloryDays.com. Those are our 2 websites. They also link back and forth to each other. Okay. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're on LinkedIn. We're on, everything now, it seems like.
Snapchat.
Snapchat, yeah. And so, if you Google my name, Kurt David, a lot of those things will pop up, I guess, so to speak. So you can. Awesome. I'm hard to hide now anymore.
Yeah, you have to be omnipresent nowadays. Yeah. I don't know if you heard of Grant Cardone. He's a real estate investor. He has a very big brand online. He's been featured in Success Magazine, but he's just all about being omnipresent and being on everything. So that you have to do it to.
Well, if I can say something down that line too, Hayward, is that one of the things I learned after being an athlete, in fact, I learned it very hard, was developing multiple streams of income. Because as an athlete, I had one stream of income, and that was it. And when that got cut off, it was like a rude awakening, like, oh my goodness. And so that was a lesson I learned early, to say, I need to work to develop multiple streams of income.
Exactly.
And it's the same thing with, you just mentioned, is having multiple streams of marketing, or where people can find you at as well.
That's what we have to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Now, wrapping up here, last question. Can you tell me a little bit about what legacy means to you, and how you want your legacy to be remembered?
Legacy to me is something bigger than me. And at 6'9", 250 pounds, not much is bigger than me, but seriously, leaving something behind that's bigger than me. And so, we can talk about legendary leaders, Abraham Lincoln and George Washington, and people that left a legacy behind them. Martin Luther King Jr. I mean, the list goes on. There's people that their legacy is bigger than them. I'm not trying to compare my life to them by any means, but certainly having a higher than just Kurt David, something bigger than me, and something I didn't mention that I should have mentioned was about the TV show. Is one of my legacies with the show is it's not just about former athletes, it's not just about entertainment or learning from these athletes. One of the foundations of the show is I want to give back. And I had an experience, and I have to back up a little bit to tell you about this experience. I mentioned about the Detroit Rescue Mission Ministries. I'm an ambassador for them. I was down at one of the facilities, and I'm walking into the facility, and this homeless guy walks up to me, and he asked me what time it was. And if I didn't have a watch on that my wife had given me, I would have given him my watch. But I'm like, okay, and I gave him the time. And it dawned on me, I said, you know what? Time is one of the most valuable assets we have, and these people that are in these circumstances, most of them don't have watches, right? They don't have a clue of what time it is, and I'm thinking, wow, time is one of our most valuable assets. What's something I can do to help these people? They have these shelters for food and spiritual guidance, and getting them back on their feet. And it dawned on me, it's like, what if I were just to provide a watch to these people as like a way of just kind of giving back? And so I created this thing that's called Watch This, right, for the TV show, because it's our charity for the show. And what we're going to do is proceeds from the show, we're going to buy watches and donate them to homeless people. So it's called Watch This, kind of paralleled with the show, but also donating watches to homeless people.
Yeah, so very interesting.
So the reason why I bring that up is, again, it's got to be bigger than just me. This show, what I do in my life with my family, it's got to be bigger than me. What am I doing with my kids, and my wife for that matter, that is going to leave the legacy when I'm gone? Because face it, all of us at some point, these bodies are going to expire.
Right, it's dust.
Yeah,
it's dust.
We're at some point, this body's going to be gone. I hope to God that I got another 20 years out of this body or whatever.
I think you got a little longer than that.
You never know, God willing, right? But my point is, what am I doing to set my kids up to be a legendary have a legacy, so to speak, for them, that they say, okay, boy, this is what I learned from my dad, and this is something I can apply as a parent, or this is something I can apply in my life. Those are the things that are important to me, right? Making money's great because I can feed the family then and pay the rent.
Right.
But to me, it's more of what are the nuggets that I'm leaving behind. So that's what legacy is. What are the nuggets that I'm leaving behind, and how many people can I impact, in a positive way, whether it be spiritually, through food, through just practical things like a watch, whatever it is.
Wow, well, that pretty much sums it up. And once again, Career Pulse Podcast listeners, thank you for attending the Career Pulse Podcast with myself and Kurt David. And we look forward to for you guys listening to us soon. Any other departing words?
No, I appreciate it. If anybody needs to contact me, they can go to our website, kurtdavid.com, or from glorydays.com, and reach out to us on Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn, and I'd be happy to have people connect with me.
Great. All right. Career Pulse Podcast. Hayward Crawford, Kurt David, out.
All right, there you have it. Kurt David there to close the podcast off strong. We are officially done with season 1 of the Career Pulse Podcast. So many great takeaways from talking with Kurt, obviously with his years of knowledge and kind of insight to his career transition. It really served a lot of good takeaways I have here. One, how he has a mission, serve God and serve others. That's really his purpose. When people ask him what he does, that's just part of what he does. He talks about his early career in the playing overseas as a pro athlete in Germany. His adversity and setbacks from a knee injury, and how he really used that as a crossroad and path that led to really reinventing himself as a sports career transition expert, and really the authority on interviewing athletes on life after pro sports. It's really interesting how things kind of just fall together. I like how he mentioned how he has to say no to so many more times than he says yes, which is a very critical mindset you have to have in the world of entrepreneurship and establishing different things and pathways in your business. I really like how he mentioned about the 3 big rocks versus the water, sand, and small rocks. How you really have this bowl, and those 3 big rocks represent those priorities you got to get done in the day or the week or the month. And when you kind of let little things, life and adversity, get in the way, which is the water, sand, and small rocks, once again, that means everything can't fit in. So heard that analogy a few times and glad to kind of hear it again, because it's kind of like, hey, you got to listen to it. But once you hear it 3 or 4 times, you finally start getting an idea. The fact that he said he took 3 years off to write his first book, and some of the challenges he faced and some aha moments was really good takeaways. How he mentioned using other people's success as a learning tool and not as a reason to compare. That's a really big point. And also, failure is not fatal. He also mentioned the process, his own process. It was called the process of PDCA, plan, do, check, and adjust, and how it can be applied to any area in our life. And once again, I really look forward to seeing his show continue to grow. I know he's looking to take From Glory Days from Metro Detroit, Michigan stations to broadcasting nationally. So I'm really excited to see how, once again, continue to follow his work, and looking forward to seeing more big things from him. So once again, guys, thanks for tuning in and being very patient. I know I'm not the best public speaker or communicator, but I hope you really got a lot of good takeaways and nuggets from this first season of the Career Pulse Podcast. And looking forward to see you guys when season 2 comes around. Have a good one and take care.